Welcome to Wine Soundtrack USA. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world in 30 answers. Discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Allison Levine, and I am sitting in Healdsburg, California with Ridgely Evers of DaVero. And Ridgely, welcome to Wine Soundtrack. We're sitting here in this beautiful outdoor area covered by leaves and trees, and it's just gorgeous here. Tell everyone where DaVero is and a little bit about DaVero.
So we're in Healdsburg, California. We're about a mile out of town. We're a biodynamic farm first and winery. We focus on Mediterranean varietals to fit better in our Mediterranean climate. And we produce actually a remarkable range of wines, all produced entirely naturally from the moment of bud break all the way through. We think about life holistically, and in that context, says the recovering MBA, there is a circle of life, and we are sitting in a circle of willow trees, creating this amazing place.
Fantastic. Now, you say Mediterranean varieties. Can you tell us a little bit about how many different grapes you're working with and what you're growing? And then I'll just add the second question as part of that. Are you exclusively estate fruit, or do you source from anywhere? And if it's estate, how many acres are we dealing with here?
So there are about 9 questions in there. Let me see if I can tease them all apart. We own 2 farms, the home farm where my wife and I live, and then the winery property. Between those 2 farms, we grow 11 different Italian varieties. We also work with a number of partner wineries, all of whom we have compensated to convert to biodynamic farming.
Wow.
We have long-term contracts with all of them, and our contracts are based on acreage. Because if they have a bad year, that doesn't mean that their costs went down. It just means their revenues would normally go down. And we want them to think of us and us to think of them as being in the same boat together. So we share the risk. So we now make wine from about 18 different varieties. Part of that is because we've placed a lot of bets to try and understand this Mediterranean climate. Mm-hmm. And we've really, in the last few years, begun to fully get a sense of what thrives here and what does well here.
And can you give us a little sampling of some of those varieties?
Well, let me walk down the hill from our home farm. So on the home farm, we're growing Sagrantino from Umbria. We're growing Sangiovese from Tuscany. We're growing Palagrello Bianco from Campania.
Wow.
We have a young vineyard going where we expect to have Sangiovese Grosso. And maybe a little Trebbiano Spoletino. And then down here on at the winery, we're growing Malvasia Bianca, Barbera. We just grafted a block over to Nero d'Avola. Oh. We have a vineyard just behind us that we call Impossibile.
So what is from there?
It is a blend that would never happen in Italy. And in fact, in Italian, when I presented him with a bottle without showing them the label, and he tasted it, and then he said, "That's delicious. What's in it?" And I told him, he said, "Impossibile," because it would be like Montagues and Capulets dating. It doesn't work out well. So that block, we're growing Montepulciano, Nebbiolo, and Sagrantino. And it makes a stunning blend.
Impossibile.
Exactly. And then we're also growing Greco. That's it for down here. And then partners are growing Barbera, Sangiovese, Primitivo.
Wow.
And then a stealth white wine that I can't really talk about that's called Allegro Bianco that's going to be spectacular, and again is a blend.
And again, your estate properties are how many acres?
It kind of depends on how you want to count. We farm a total of 66 acres, more than half of which is woodland. A fair amount of what's left is open space or pasture for sheep. So in terms of vineyard acreage, it's about 20.
So in 20 acres plus your partner ones, you have put the entire country of Italy right here in Healdsburg.
Not quite, not quite. If you look at the map, what we've done is we've followed the Apennines from kind of southern Piemonte to northern Campania. And if you look at the map that's in front of you or that's on our website and you look at Italy, you will see that that area is all a very similar climate type, which in the Köppen-Geiger World Climate Atlas is referred to as CSA, which means a hot, dry summer climate.
Wow. What is your total case production?
About 5,000.
And are your wines available across the U.S. or internationally, direct to consumer only?
We are 100%, actually, we're basically 100% direct to club.
Okay.
As a biodynamic farm, the idea is that you're focused on the health of the farm as a living organism. And when you drill into that, it means the intentional plants and the wild plants and the intentional animals and the wild animals and the farm workers. And we also include our club members in that because that completes the circle of sustainability.
Ah, beautiful. So, what is your first memory relevant to wine?
I hated it.
When you were 5? No, but
no, I don't think we ever had wine at home ever.
Mm-hmm.
And so my parents, I grew up in the 50s. My parents, like most of my friends' parents, drank cocktails, and they drank cocktails all the way through dinner, which is an important factoid that we may revisit later. The first wines I had were, right around the same time I had my first beer, and I liked beer a lot better than wine. But it wasn't until the kind of mid-'70s that I really began to, I was taken under the wing by a wonderful man named Joel Butler, who was with a wine shop down in south of San Francisco in Menlo Park called Beltramo's. And he very carefully educated me on the wines, principally of Bordeaux, and to a lesser extent Burgundy, and it was love.
Oh. So, what would you say is the first or most memorable wine you ever drank, or that kind of aha moment? And I think we spoke a little earlier and you mentioned there might be 2 aha moments. So,
the first...
You've probably had like a dozen aha moments, but...
but no, there are 2 that are standouts, and they remain standouts, 50 years on. The first was a wine that I had in 1979 when I was 28. And it was the 1961 Petrus, which many people would argue is the greatest wine of the 20th century, and which I had come into possession of by virtue of being the shill at an auction in an art museum, and I was the only person who bid on it.
And how much did it take you for?
$20. And at that point, it was selling for, way more than 10 times that if you were able to find any. And I tasted it, and I still remember how it made me feel. I was like, oh my God, this is what the fuss is about. I totally get it. This is, and that was the pinnacle of a portion of my life where I really began to understand that wine properly done is a story. Mm-hmm. Right? It doesn't tell, it may or may not tell a story if you know, but it is a story. And it's a time capsule. It's a magical thing.
Oh, I love it. And your second one?
Well, that was so I described that as the wine that kept me out of the wine business for 20 years. And then the wine that...
and yet you were in software, so you could afford to enjoy wine.
All I aspire to is the lifestyle you think I lead. But 20 years later, I was having dinner in New York with a chef, and he opened a bottle of wine for me, and I tasted it, and I was blown away in much the same way that the Petrus blew me away, but oh my God, what a different wine. And again, I still remember it vividly. And I turned to him and I said, I'm going to plant this grape and make this wine, and that's why I'm in the wine business.
Wow. And that wine was?
That was the 1994 Paolo Bea Sagrantino di Montifalco.
So, wow. So you obviously have tasted wonderful wines and traveled all over the world tasting wonderful wines, or even domestically being able to taste all these wonderful wines. When you think about that, who do you think, what country or what culture gets to drink the best in terms of quality?
Oh, that's a really good question. I would say maybe not the answer you're looking for. Wine has no idea what language it speaks. It has no idea what country it's in. It has no idea what the bottle looks like. It has no idea what the winery looks like. What it really understands is its climate. The grape understands is its climate, and properly done wine is an encapsulation of that spirit from that vintage in that place. And so I would say that any place that is growing fruit that is climatically appropriate and then allowing that fruit to make itself into wine is experiencing wine at its best.
Mm-hmm. So if we were to come into your home, what sort of wines do you have in your wine cellar? Is it predominantly Italian, or is it a smattering of interesting things?
It's a mix of French and Italian and some Spanish.
Huh. And have you opened anything recently that drank really well?
Yeah, for my birthday last weekend, we opened a Magnum of 1967 Chateau Clément, which is a Sauterne from a fantastic vintage, which I shared with a group of friends with seared foie gras on brioche. And it was, my tail still thumps when I think about that.
Amazing, truly amazing.
You never have a surface near this way. That would be the Gallo Cup. Seriously.
Really? So I'm curious, you're working with such a variety of varieties, of course, all Italian, but do you think there's a such thing as a perfect variety?
No, definitely not. I think that there are different categories of varieties. One of the most popular grapes in the world is in the U.S. is called Zinfandel. It's from Puglia, called Primitivo, originally from Croatia, where it's Krelnjak Kaštelanski.
Oh, you say that so well.
It makes what I refer to as keep mommy and daddy from fighting juice, right? And it's delicious. It's fun to drink. It's easy. I think there are other varieties that are more nuanced and more stimulating. But first of all, the best wine hands down is the one you have. Mm-hmm. But I often describe white Burgundy as maybe the most complex, fascinating wine in the world, and particularly when it's aged. Mm-hmm. And I don't know a better metaphor for this to describe it. White Burgundy, when it's young, is like Lauren Bacall in To Have and Have Not when she was 19, and she was heart-stoppingly beautiful. In her 70s, she was breathtaking. Absolutely, utterly, mind-numbingly breathtaking.
So I would say that while white Burgundy might be the closest thing to perfection.
Yeah.
And
properly done, right?
Properly done, of course. And let's see if you can, without getting too controversial, your opinion on wine critics and scores.
Well, two stories. Our olive oil, which is how I got started with bringing trees in from Italy, has won every award in the world. And at a certain point, I looked at that and I thought, well, this is just dumb. There is no best oil. Start with what it is that you're having and then decide what oil you're going to use as an ingredient in that dish. Mm-hmm. And then the helicopter arrived.
background, it's okay, but when it's overhead, it's not so okay.
Yeah.
So do you want me to ask that one a question again?
No, I can just keep going. I'm a pro.
You are.
So we just stopped entering awards or contests because I thought that, there's just sort of misguidedness in its construct. I kind of feel the same way about most wine competitions, and I love the story of the professor, I think at Fresno State, who bought a case of wine, soaked the labels off of 8 of the 12 bottles, put different labels on them, and then submitted one of each 3 labels to the same wine competition. There's 4 different competitions, 3 different bottles, all the same wine, different labels. And in not only did the wine score wildly different across the competitions, they scored wildly different within the competitions. So that said, I think that there are some people who have extraordinary palates. So I think it's a useful tool for the consumer. But in many cases, I think that it shortchanges the consumer because, again, properly made, wine is a time capsule that evolves. And so it's situational. And it's also different over time. If it's the same over time, then it's frozen, and it's not actually a time capsule, and it's not a good representation of the potential of wine, I think. I still have some 82 Bordeaux's, and there have been some times when they tasted awful, and then a year later they were magnificent.
So for somebody who hasn't had the pleasure to taste your wines yet, what do you think they're missing out on?
I think that our wines, first of all, our wines are truly expressions of the environment in which they're grown. And we started by choosing varieties that are climate appropriate. Like this is where they evolved. We are actually in a Mediterranean climate zone. We're at the latitude of the central Mediterranean. So we're very much like that. And we can see those vines behaving naturally very differently than their Northern European counterparts grown in this climate. I think what they'll find, therefore, in our wines is that they're each authentic because we really subscribe to the belief that sugar plus yeast equals alcohol is nature, not humans. And so we step back and we let the wines make themselves. And so each is actually very different from the others. And the wines that you guys are going to taste today are all very much distinct from one another. I think the one arc that carries through all of them, which is unusual, is that they all have acid.
The key.
The key, exactly, because wine in Europe, as you know, is an ingredient in a meal, and as a beverage in the context of a meal, you want acid because it refreshes your palate.
Well, this kind of brings my next question is, how do you approach food and wine pairing? Do you feel that there are rules to follow, or do you have certain tips that you use that someone else might benefit from hearing about?
So I guess what I've come to is it's an incredibly personal decision, and my view is if there's a food that you're having and there's a wine that you like that you think that will go well with it, it will. There are very, very few cases where I will steer somebody in a particular direction with a wine. Sagrantino is one of the cases where we do that because Sagrantino is actually the most tannic grape on the planet. All fruit tannins, not wood tannins. We only use neutral oak. But those fruit tannins are profound and powerful. But when you have them with a good, fatty, wood-charred meat, there's nothing like it. There's just nothing like it.
So, I mean, a quick answer, if possible, and of course, after you're saying Sagrantino, my mouth is watering for it, but if you had to choose, or could you choose, red, white, or rosé?
Wine is red.
Still or sparkling?
Yes. So if wine is red, then still.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We make a delightful sparkling. You guys had some when we started out. But I love, Sophia Loren was the one who answered that question when a waiter asked her if she wanted white wine or red wine. She said, Cara, wine is red.
So if space aliens were to land on your property and join us right here, which of your wines would you want to welcome them with to introduce DaVero?
Probably the same one I'm going to welcome you with, which is our Alto Basso. Alto Basso is a kissing cousin of Impossibile. Mm-hmm. It's a blend that really we haven't found in Italy, mm-hmm. and yet it's so startlingly, obviously perfect that I'm kind of stunned that we haven't.
And what is the blend?
It is a blend of, we call it Alto Basso, that means high-low. We call it Alto Basso because the Sangiovese in it is from our home farm at the Hawk Mountain Vineyard, which is up high. And then the Barbera is right here at the winery down low. And again, very much like Impossibile, but in this case only involving two. It really would be like Montagues and Capulets dating, which does not turn out well in Italy. And the way that I would explain that, Allison, is to say that we are not merely bound by, but celebrate climate.
Well, this brings me to my next question is...
But we are not bound by tradition.
No, and so this is sort of two questions that I have. The first is about climate. As a biodynamic farmer, we know that vintage variation and letting the vintage speak for itself is of the utmost importance and what happens. But in a place like this, how much variation do you see year to year? Do you see things repeating themselves, or do you see more difference from year to year, or maybe sort of block to block?
If you're doing what we're doing, then what you get are covers of the same song.
That's a beautiful analogy. I like that.
And each one is distinctive, mm-hmm. right? So there's a through line on our wines. But for example, if I lined up from 2011 through 2014 Sagrentinos, you would recognize them each as Sagrantino instantly. And you would also say, these are all very different. That's magic.
Yeah, that is. So do you have any good luck rituals that you do at the start of harvest, you and your team, or you alone?
No. And in fact, the first year so when we built the winery, the first crush that we did was 2014. And I made up T-shirts that said, Harvest 2014, what could possibly go wrong?
There's no preparing. There's no predictors. There's nothing that'll tell you. Nature
bats last. If you want to hear God's plans, tell her if you want to hear God laugh, tell her your plans, right? It's really, it's been fascinating and fun for me. And I would say I've also been tremendously lucky. He said knocking on wood by way of ritual. We've made a lot of unconventional decisions, and they've by and large turned out really well. Mm-hmm. I've spent my non-farming career, which has been in parallel with my farming career, in startups in Silicon Valley. And there it's about making decisions that are unconventional, because otherwise why have a startup? And many times those don't turn out. Mm-hmm. But here we've been remarkably fortunate, and I think the thing that binds all of those decisions together is to start from the premise of, okay, what's closest to the natural process?
Very cool. So you're a biodynamic farmer, and people always like to talk and joke how biodynamic farmers like to run through the vineyards naked or do crazy things in the middle of night. But I'll just ask you the simplest: do you talk to your vines, or do you talk to the wines in the cellar? And if so, what do you say to them?
So, I'm a very left brain guy. Biodynamics is not something you would normally associate with someone like me. But I'm also a systems thinker, and I always have been. And the thing that I love about biodynamics is this concentration on the farm as a living organism and the system that is the farm. And I would say that if you were to, there's a component to biodynamics to which I don't subscribe. We adhere, but I don't subscribe. Around this whole idea of preparations. I was a theology major at one point, briefly in college, and what you learn is that in every religion, there are certain rituals and practices that are mechanisms to codify behavior in your population. So in that context, what role do the preps play? It's not about you talking to your farm and your plants. It's about you listening to your farm and your plants. That I do every day.
Beautiful answer. So when you're not...
The added benefit of being true.
So when you're not working, or I should say when you're not in the vineyard, how do you spend your free time? Or when you're not working in software and in wine, do you have any free time?
So my wife and I have two rules. The first is we only work on days that end in Y. And the second is that we only work a half a day, and we each get to choose what we do with the other 12 hours.
Give everyone a moment to calculate that.
There's an old saying that if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. I love what I do. I really do. My principal forms of recreation are food and wine and cycling.
God, I love you. It's perfect. So when you're planning a romantic evening with your wife, what sort of wines do you open to set the mood or to make for a romantic evening?
Interesting question. A romantic evening requires that we not be at home because we live where we work. And I would say that the way that I describe, I often say wine is an ingredient in a meal. And of course, the table is the most sacred place in life. And the most important ingredient in a meal is the people at the table. And the second most important ingredient is the food. And the third is the wine, unless the people are a problem, in which case it's the quantity of the wine and not the quality of the wine that matters. So I would say that, and the pandemic has been a wonderful part of this. Colleen and I have been married for 25 years, been together for 27. And we've learned through intense proximity for the last 15, 18 months, we really enjoy one another. And so just being together is the primary ingredient required for a romantic evening.
Fantastic. Avoided the question of any wines, but
but then
anything you drink is perfect.
Well, anything that you drink is going to be, as long as you choose wisely, is going to be good. And occasionally it'll be a standout. And because we have to go away in order to be able to relax and spend time together, we're usually drinking off of somebody else's wine list. And so it's a process of discovery, and that's the fun part.
I love that. So I know you said if you never, work a day in your life, it's perfect. But is there another piece of advice that you live by that someone gave you, whether it's a work ethic, something towards work, or something just in life in general? What's the greatest piece of advice you carry with you?
Well, I think the greatest thing that I've learned over now 70 years of disrupting the planet is the Serenity Prayer. Serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I think that it takes time to really get to the point where you understand that. And that doesn't mean that you're a cork bobbing in the river of life. It just means, choose wisely where you elect to do battle and to engage and to try to make a difference. The second thing is that time is the only irreplaceable resource. So use that wisely. I think those are the the two biggies. Those are the ones that I pass on to my kids.
I love that. So I'm curious, you have a very lofty career. I mean, you were the founder of QuickBooks. You were the first person to bring olive plantings here and create olive oil in the U.S.
In the 20th century.
In the 20th century.
A lot of olive trees brought here in the 1800s to make cooking oil. I wanted to make finishing oil.
So you were the first person to do that. You also have created this beautiful biodynamic farm producing wines. I'm curious, when you look back at your career, what would you say is one of your proudest achievements? I might have just listed the three, but I don't know. Is there...
I just had a fair amount of time to reflect on this because for my birthday, I rode from, and I don't know how well you know the area, but I rode from here down to Marshall out on the coast of Marin on my bike. It's a long ride, and so you have a lot of time to think. And I would say that the thing that I take the most satisfaction in is being able to blend all of these things together, and they all actually do fit together. The thing that I am proudest of is my children.
That's why I asked in your work.
And the thing that I am happiest about is meeting Colleen.
Hard to go off of that. So complete this sentence for me. A table without wine is like?
Breakfast.
And now we're sitting at a beautiful table in this beautiful outdoor arena, in the shade. And if there could be one person sitting at this table with you, sharing a bottle of DaVero from any walk of life, living or deceased, who would you want to be sharing a bottle with? Winston
Churchill.
Okay. I like these quick answers. So at the front of your mind. So as a
Saved modern civilization.
As a biodynamic producer, where do you think we'll be in 500 years or 1,000 years? Do you think we'll still be drinking wine, making wine?
If we don't get our act in gear, we will be extinct. If we are still here, let's recognize that alcohol and animals is tightly interwoven and has been for a long time. And my guess is it will continue to be as long as there are humans around in search of alcohol. And I happen to think that, honestly, that the highest form, I treasure wine for its complexity and nuance and surprise and delight. And so, yeah, I would bet that if we're here, there will be wine.
So we're almost finished. We're just going to play a little game now. Some of your wines, pairing with music, it conjures emotion and feeling as wine does in us. So when I arrived, you welcomed me with a glass of the Rosato di Amici, a sparkling wine, a frizzante, I should say. What sort of music would that make you think of?
I'm really bad at this. I apologize.
It could be a genre too, a style.
Yeah, that's going to be disco.
I like that.
For sure.
I like that. So then you spoke about your Sagrantino. What about that one? The big fruit tannin wine.
So I tend to lean in the direction of classical music for this kind of question. And I would say that it's like the Ode to Joy in Beethoven's Ninth.
Okay. And what about the Alto Basso?
Mozart. Piano Concerto.
Okay. And last one, Impossibile.
Man, that's like, it's like nothing else. So the immediate association with Springsteen.
I love that. Perfect. So last question. What wine region is at the very top of your bucket list to visit?
Is it one that I've been or one that I've never been?
That's up to you. It's at the top of your list.
I have not spent enough time in several places that I would say that I would need to spend time in. I don't know, maybe 4.
Okay, what are the 4?
The Veneto for Valpolicella, because it's just such an exceptional wine, so much variability, so fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Northern Piemonte because. And then, honestly, I've never been to Bordeaux, and I really, really, really want to, just like camp out there for 6 months or a year.
Especially since that's the first wine that kind of opened your eyes.
And then the same thing is true of Burgundy. I have the same sense about Burgundy and Bordeaux that I have about most wine regions, which is that we probably here don't know about so many of the really spectacular tiny production wines.
Mm-hmm.
And like most of the wines we make are a couple hundred cases.
So that leads me to my last and final question.
Your last.
My last. This is more for the people listening. While you're looking to explore these wine regions and explore wines that we probably don't get to see here, a lot of people have not been able to taste DaVero. So if they wanted to come here, what can they do? Are you open for tasting 7 days a week? How can they find you and how can they visit you here in Healdsburg?
So as you may have gathered through this process, we have a lot to talk about here.
Uh-huh.
And so we made the very conscious decision about 3 years ago to shift to by appointment only.
Mm-hmm.
And we only work with small groups, no more than 6. And we allocate an hour and a half to spend with each of them. And our basic model here, Allison, is because we're club only and because we're limited in our supply, everybody on staff shares the same belief, which is you're not under any obligation to buy wine or join a club or anything else when you're here. But if you leave here not having learned something, we failed. So our job here is to teach. And if that resonates with you, wonderful. We'd love to have you come visit.
Fantastic. So how can they find you?
DaVero.com, DaVero.com.
Well, perfect. Ridge, thank you so much for joining us today on Wine Soundtrack, and let's get tasting.
I love that idea. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack USA. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.